Welcome back, dear friends, and a gentle welcome to all new visitors joining us tonight. Thank you for being here, for supporting this channel, and for giving your time and imagination to these peaceful journeys through history. To my returning subscribers, your presence means more than you know. And to those discovering this channel for the first time, I'm truly glad you're here. May this story bring you calm, comfort, and a little wonder before sleep. Tonight's tale carries us far back in time, to an era shaped not by machines, but by human hands, vision, and determination. How did Rome connect an empire that stretched across 3 continents? How did they build roads so strong that some of them still exist today, over 2,000 years later? This is the story behind the roads that built an empire, how they were planned, carved, layered, and crowned with stone, and how they became the pathways through which culture, armies, ideas, and civilizations moved. Before we begin, if you enjoy gentle historical storytelling, whispered journeys through forgotten worlds, and soft narration designed to ease your mind, please consider subscribing. Your support helps this peaceful community grow, and it lets me bring you more stories to drift off to, night after night. And now, as my spoken narration comes to an end later in the video, soft relaxing music will begin guiding you gently toward rest, letting your mind wander down quiet Roman roads until sleep finds you. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let us step together into the ancient world. In the quiet dawn of an ancient world, before bustling cities hummed with the rhythm of wheels and footsteps, the Roman Empire dreamed of connection. Not the kind forged by treaties or temporary alliances, but something far more enduring: threads of stone spun across continents, binding distant lands to a single beating heart. These threads, these meticulously crafted paths of ambition and labor, would become known as the Roman roads, the arteries of an empire that refused to stand still. Imagine the world as it was then. Mountains lay untouched, forests stretched like shadowed seas, deserts shimmered with silence, and rivers carved their patient lines through the earth. Most civilizations saw these landscapes as barriers, but Rome saw challenges waiting to be solved. And so, as legions marched and borders expanded, another quieter revolution began, one measured not in battles won, but in miles paved, foundations laid, and engineering wisdom passed down through generations. It is here, in this grand vision of movement and mastery, that our story truly begins. For centuries, the phrase "all roads lead to Rome" would echo across time, whispered as both admiration and myth. But behind this saying lies a truth that is even more remarkable. Before Rome could unite the world, it first had to unite itself. Roads became their instrument not only for war, but for governance, trade, communication, and culture. They were the empire's lifelines, ensuring that messages, merchants, and militaries could move with a speed that defied the imagination of their age. To understand their importance, picture a Roman commander stationed at the empire's far edge, perhaps in the dense forests of Germania or the dusty frontier of Syria. A letter must reach him from Rome not in months, but in days. Supplies must arrive in time. Reinforcements must march without delay, and orders must travel clearly, without distortion. With poor roads, an empire collapses into its own weight. With great ones, it breathes, expands, and endures. The early Roman roads were not merely routes worn by repeated steps. They were feats of engineering that outlasted the civilization that built them. Even today, more than 2,000 years later, fragments of these ancient highways lie exposed to the sun, still solid, still recognizable, still bearing the straight, unwavering confidence of their makers. To see one is to stand in the presence of history, not a ruin, but a survivor. But how did these roads come to be? Why did Rome invest such extraordinary effort into creating a network that would eventually span more than 400,000 kilometers? The answer lies in Rome's unique vision of power. Their leaders understood something that most ancient empires overlooked. True control did not come from conquest alone, but from the ability to move, to respond, to connect. Roads were not an afterthought of expansion, but they were a requirement for it. They enabled legions to march with unmatched discipline, appearing where enemies least expected them. They allowed merchants to carry olive oil, glassware, wine, and ideas across thousands of miles. They let governors and messengers traverse provinces swiftly, ensuring Rome's voice carried clearly from one frontier to another. Through the roads, law traveled, culture traveled, the empire traveled. And so, early in Rome's rise, the decision was made. If the world was to be Roman, it must be reachable. The task was enormous. The terrain ahead of them was not forgiving. It rose in steep mountains, dipped into marshy valleys, twisted through forests, and stretched into endless plains. Every location demanded a different strategy. Yet Rome approached the challenge with characteristic resolve. They studied the land, marked the lines, and prepared to carve order out of wilderness. But the roads were more than practical achievements. They were symbols, stone declarations of Rome's presence and permanence. Wherever a Roman road passed, it carried a quiet message. Rome is here. Rome is watching. Rome will endure. The construction of these early roads, however, was not the work of emperors alone. It was the labor of countless hands, legionaries who swapped swords for shovels, engineers who mapped invisible paths across uncharted ground, slaves who lifted stone after stone under the relentless sun, and local communities who contributed materials, expertise, or forced labor. Together, they formed the unseen backbone of this monumental endeavor. Yet even with such manpower, the roads would not have lasted without the brilliance of Roman design. This was not simple paving. It was a multi-layered system crafted to withstand rain, frost, heat, and centuries of use. Each road had a foundation of stone, a heart of gravel and crushed rock, and a crown of fitted paving slabs arranged like a puzzle that refused to come undone. Beneath the surface lay drainage systems, cambering techniques, and deliberate alignment choices, calculated to create durability unmatched for millennia. To walk upon a Roman road today is to feel an uncanny sense of timelessness. The stones beneath your feet may have known the tread of soldiers carrying imperial standards, merchants guiding pack animals, or travelers whispering prayers to distant gods. These roads were witnesses to triumphs and tragedies, revolutions and reunions, beginnings and endings. They were constant when empires changed hands, when cities rose and fell, when centuries rearranged the world around them. And yet, despite their age, despite the centuries of weather and warfare, many remain as steady as the day they were built. Their straight lines still slice across landscapes with Roman precision. Their foundations still resist erosion. Their memory still shapes modern Europe, where countless highways follow paths first, carved by ancient engineers. But every colossal achievement has a beginning, and before Rome could perfect its engineering, before pavements gleamed beneath Mediterranean skies, there was a vision, a dream that the empire could be tied together not by distance, but by direction. It is in that dream that chapter 1 finds its conclusion, and the next chapter begins. For before the stones were laid, before the laborers worked, Rome first had to understand the land itself. The mountains, the rivers, the plains were not obstacles, but puzzles waiting to be solved. In Encoleno, Encoluna, and dearest Sudilla, we step into the minds of the Roman surveyors, the quiet strategists of the empire, who measured the world with primitive tools yet astonishing precision, charting courses that would alter history forever, long before the first stone was ever set into the earth, before the rumble of carts or the rhythmic march of legionaries echoed along the finished ways. Rome faced a far more silent challenge. The land itself, mountains rose like ancient guardians, rivers meandered in unpredictable curves, dense forests concealed shadows and secrets, and marshes swallowed careless footsteps whole. To build roads across such landscapes required more than muscle or manpower. It required vision, precision, and a deep understanding of nature's temperament. And so, The story of Roman road building begins not with construction, but with surveying, the art of reading the world. Imagine a small team of Roman surveyors stepping into an untouched valley at dawn. The mist clings to the ground. The air smells of wet soil, and the first golden threads of sunlight spill over the ridge. These men are not warriors, though many once served. They are thinkers, strategists, creators. Their weapons are not swords or shields, but instruments of alignment and measurement, simple tools whose genius lies in their reliability. The first of these, the groma, stands tall in the hands of a trained surveyor. At first glance, it is nothing more than a wooden staff with a cross-shaped head and weighted strings dangling from each arm. But in the right hands, it becomes a conductor's wand, orchestrating straight lines across uneven terrain. With the groma, surveyors determine precise right angles, laying out the initial geometry that every road would follow. Beside it lies another tool, the korobitsa, long wooden beam with notches, a water trough, and a plumb line. It seems primitive, almost too simple to trust. But the Romans understood something profound. Water always finds its level. With this knowledge, the korobets allowed them to judge inclines and slopes, with an accuracy that rivaled instruments invented more than 1,000 years later. But even with these tools, the task was anything but easy. To chart a road through wilderness was to walk into uncertainty. Surveyors trekked through brambles and knee-high grass, across jagged ravines, and along cliffs hardened by centuries of wind and rain. They watched the sky for signs of changing weather, noted the soil beneath their boots, and studied the behavior of rivers where they flooded, where they narrowed, where they whispered hints of easier crossings. Rome's goal was simple yet bold. Draw the straightest possible line between 2 points, not just because it symbolized power and efficiency, but because a straight path allowed for speed and marching, speed and messages, speed in the movement of the empire itself. Yet perfect straightness was not always wise. Nature demanded respect. A straight line through a swamp would sink. A straight line up a sheer cliff was impractical. A straight line across a floodplain would vanish with the seasons. And so surveyors compromised when necessary, bending their lines gently around obstacles, but always maintaining the Roman signature of resolute direction. The work required patience. Days were spent studying shadows, listening to the rustle of tall grasses, watching the drift of clouds across the horizon. Rome's engineers were not simply building roads. They were learning how to persuade the land to cooperate not through brute force, but through calculated partnership. Once a course was chosen, markers were placed along the ground, wooden stakes in straight intervals, like a dotted outline for the future road. These became the skeleton of the empire's grand design. Legions and local laborers would later follow these markers, carving the path deeper and deeper until the vision became reality. Yet surveying was not only about direction. It was also about understanding the hidden dangers beneath the surface. A patch of dry earth might conceal a spring beneath. A stretch of solid ground might turn to mud during seasonal rains. A valley that seemed peaceful could transform into a river after a single storm. Rome learned these truths through experience, sometimes costly experience. Its surveyors became masters of reading the land's quiet language. In their careful notes, they documented everything: the type of soil, the weight it could bear, the nearest sources of stone, the abundance of timber, the width of rivers, the strength of currents, and the best locations for bridges. They measured not only distance, but possibility. And it was not just the land that required study. The people who inhabited it also shaped the choices surveyors made. Roads passing through friendly provinces could cut boldly across farmland. But in regions where local tribes resisted Roman presence, engineers might choose routes that avoided ambush points or hostile strongholds. The land taught Rome much, but so did the people. Still, despite all these variables, one rule remained constant. Every Roman road must serve the empire's needs. Surveyors were not artists, crafting beauty. They were architects, building power. This delicate balance between ambition and pragmatism played out repeatedly along Rome's expanding frontier. At times, their solutions bordered on astonishing. In mountainous regions, they carved terraces into sheer slopes or chiseled ledges wide enough for a cart to pass without falling into the abyss. In marshlands, they drove piles deep into the earth, creating artificial stability where none existed naturally. Across rivers, they marked the exact locations where bridges would someday rise, bridges that would themselves become marvels of ancient engineering. But perhaps the greatest triumph of Roman surveying was its consistency. No matter where the empire expanded, whether into the scorching deserts of North Africa or the misty forests of Britain, their methods remained disciplined, methodical, and astonishingly standardized. To the Romans, this standardization was more than convenience. It was identity. Anyone traveling from the heart of Italy to the distant edges of the empire would feel a sense of familiarity beneath their feet. The roads, no matter where they lay, spoke the same language of structure, order, and Roman confidence. And yet, when evening fell and the surveyors packed away their tools, their work was far from finished. They would gather around modest fires, sharing bread, olives, and wine, discussing the day's discoveries. Some debated the most efficient route, through a mountain corridor. Others spoke of the layers the road would require: statumen, rudis, nucleus, and summum dorsum. They could already picture it, not just a path, but a promise of connection. By the time the stars spilled across the sky, these men had already shaped the future of the empire. Their measurements would become marching orders. Their markers would become milestones. Their lines would become life. For in mastering the terrain, Rome mastered time at self-shortening journeys, accelerating communication, and forging unity across vast distances. And with the terrain finally understood and the path laid out, the next step awaited. The physical creation of the road, a monumental effort of layers, labor, and ingenuity. In Chapter 3, we descend beneath the surface and discover the genius hidden within the stones, the layered heart of a Roman road, designed to endure centuries. Before a Roman road took shape, before its stones gleamed beneath sun and moon, the earth had to be prepared. It is in this quiet, deliberate process layer, laid upon layer, that the Romans revealed their greatest secret. Their roads were not mere surfaces. They were structures engineered from the ground up with a precision that would astonish even modern builders. To understand a Roman road, one must look beneath its skin, down into the heart of a construction method that elevated simple pathways into monuments of engineering brilliance. Imagine standing at the edge of a freshly marked route. The stakes placed by the surveyors still stand, pointing the way forward like sentinels. The land beneath your feet is uneven, wild, unshaped. Now begins the transformation. Teams of workers, engineers, legionaries, slaves, and local laborers gather with tools in hand. The air hums with anticipation. Orders echo across the landscape, and the first shovel sinks into the earth. The excavation begins. A trench is dug along the surveyed line, deep enough to anchor the road for centuries. The depth varies depending on terrain, sometimes a foot or two, sometimes deeper in unstable ground. The purpose is clear. Remove the soft shifting topsoil until solid earth is revealed. Roads built on unreliable ground could buckle, sink, or separate. Roads built on firmness would stand the test of time. This is where the genius unfolds, one layer at a time. The first layer, statumen at the base, lies the statumen, a bed of large, hand-placed stones. Some were as broad as a man's chest and weighed more than a legionary esquire. Their purpose was stability. The statumen created a foundation that resisted compression and distributed weight evenly. Workers positioned each stone carefully, ensuring they interlocked without wobbling. This was not random placement. It was craftsmanship. The Romans knew that a road was only as durable as its foundation. Imagine the sound of those stones dropping into place, thuds that echoed across valleys, signaling the birth of something meant to last longer than the builders themselves. The second layer, rudis above the statumen, came the rudis, a mixture of crushed stones, gravel, and lime. This layer could be as thick as 9 inches. With each shovel, the mixture created a coarse but cohesive structure, absorbing shock and providing an incredibly strong base. Workers wetted and tamped the rudis repeatedly. The lime acted as an ancient binding agent, strengthening the material until it hardened into a resilient, concrete-like layer. This was centuries before modern cement, yet the Romans were already pioneering versions of it. Here we see one of Rome's greatest strengths. They did not merely use materials, they transformed them. The third layer, nucleus. Now the road began to take on a smoother character. The nucleus, made of finer gravel, sand, crushed pottery, and lime, was poured and compacted into a tight, near-seamless layer. This formed the transitioning body between the rough base and the refined surface soon to come. The nucleus was vital for both comfort and durability. Without it, the top paving stones would shift or crack under pressure. With it, they settled into a cushion that distributed weight with remarkable efficiency. Think of it as the heartbeat of the road, quiet, hidden, essential. The crown, summum dorsum. Finally, the most visible and famous layer emerged. The summum dorsum, the paved surface. Here Rome displayed its pride. The stones, typically basalt, lava rock, limestone, or sandstone, or cut into polygonal shapes. Workers arranged them like puzzle pieces, fitting each stone snugly against the next. Some roads featured large rectangular slabs. Others used tightly packed cobbles. The result? A hard, smooth, durable surface that could withstand the constant pounding of hooves, wheels, sandals, and storms for thousands of years. These stones were not placed flat, they were arranged slightly convex, forming the road's crown. This curvature allowed rainwater to run off into drainage ditches along the sides. Wet roads were dangerous roads. Rome's engineers solved this long before modern urban planners rediscovered the same principle. If you were to walk this road centuries ago, the faint glimmer of the smooth stones beneath the sun would guide your steps. At night, moonlight would dance across the curved surface, creating a soft silver path stretching toward the horizon. Drainage, the silent guardian, while the stones impress the eye. It is the drainage system that truly protected the road. Every Roman road incorporated ditches, culverts, and gutters designed to whisk water away from the surface and foundation. Water was the enemy of longevity. Rome's awareness of this fact is one reason so many of their roads still exist today. Picture rain falling across a Roman rotini rivulets, sliding into neatly carved channels, disappearing into the earth rather than sinking into the layers below. This careful management of water preserved the structure and prevented erosion, swelling, or collapse. Roads did not just endure by strength. They endured by strategy. Local materials, universal results. One of the most fascinating aspects of Roman engineering was their ability to adapt to whatever landscape they encountered. The stones in northern Britain differed from those in North Africa. The gravel in Gaul was unlike the sand of Syria. And yet, Roman roads looked unmistakably Roman. Their genius was not in using special materials, but in using local materials, transforming whatever nature provided into a standardized structure that worked anywhere. The road in Egypt might be lighter in color. The road in Spain might gleam with basalt. The road in Greece might echo with marble chips. But all followed the same principles. All carried the same message: Rome was a leap beyond past civilizations. Earlier civilizations built roads but not like this, not with this attention to multi-layer structuring, drainage, alignment, and longevity. The Persians created routes for couriers. The Greeks made paths between cities, but neither achieved what the Romans perfected. Rome did not merely build roads. Rome engineered permanence. The Romans approached the earth like sculptors, reshaping it with patient hands and unyielding determination. Each layer they laid was a testament to discipline, intelligence, and the belief that the future mattered. By the time the top stones were set, the road was not just a path, it was a promise, a guarantee that armies could march, merchants could travel, and ideas could flow like blood through the arteries of an ever-expanding empire. A living structure. The completed road was not a dead object. It was alive with movement, purpose, and the pulse of civilization. Chariots rattled across its stones. Traders shouted greetings from wagons laden with amphiry. Travelers traced its lines to towns, cities, ports, and temples. And beneath it all, hidden from every eye, the layers of genius worked quietly and faithfully, year after year, century after century. Long before travelers felt the steady rhythm of stone beneath their sandals, Before generals surveyed the horizon from a vantage point shaped by an unbroken ribbon of pavement, there existed an entirely different world. One filled with sweat, discipline, and thousands of hands working in unison. A Roman road, no matter how grand, no matter how enduring, was not the work of emperors or engineers alone. It was the combined effort of countless individuals, each contributing in ways both visible and unseen, all moving toward a single purpose: to give the empire a path on which its destiny could walk. When construction on a new road began, a deep stillness often settled over the chosen site. The land waited, untouched, knowing it would soon be transformed. Then, as if summoned by the rising sun, the workforce arrived in a steady procession. The first to appear were the engineersmen trained in the art of measurement, design, and practical problem-solving. They reviewed the markers laid by the surveyors, tested the soil with practiced gestures, and imagined in their minds the layers that would soon bind the earth into something purposeful and eternal. But behind the engineers came the real force of transformation. The legions, Roman soldiers, were not merely fighters. They were builders, craftsmen, laborers, and logistical masters. Each legionary carried not only weapons and armor, but also tool shovels, picks, saws, axes, and stakes. A legion on the march did not simply travel. It reshaped the very world beneath its feet. When ordered to build, they shifted instantly from warriors to workers, bringing with them military precision that turned construction into choreography. In the early morning, as mist clung to the ground, the soldiers assembled in disciplined lines. The engineers gave instructions, mapping out the day's tasks with clear gestures and calm confidence. Then, with the efficiency of a single organism, the legion moved. Some cut into the earth, establishing the trench that would cradle the road's foundations. Others cleared brush and trees, their axes ringing through the air. Still others transported stones and gravel from quarries or riverbeds, forming long human chains to move the materials with relentless rhythm. Every action was deliberate. Every motion had purpose. And yet, despite the heavy labor, the atmosphere often held a sense of collective pride. A legionary understood that the road he built might one day carry his own footsteps, or those of his comrades, or those of future generations carrying the flame of Rome farther into the world. To build was to serve, and service to Rome was the highest calling a soldier could answer. Yet the legions did not work alone. Alongside them stood slaves, prisoners of war, and hired laborers from the local populations. Some came willingly, enticed by the promise of pay, food, or Roman favor. Others came because they had no choice. Their lives, marked by hardship, became interwoven with the empire's grand ambitions. They hauled stones, mixed lime, gathered timber, and dug the earth until their hands were raw and their muscles burned. Though the work was difficult, the presence of so many roles created an unexpected harmony. Legionaries carved the trenches, slaves broke and shaped the stones. Local workers transported materials using carts pulled by oxen or mules. Supervisors walked the line, observing, correcting, and encouraging. At times, songs rose from the laborious rhythmic chants to ease the physical strain. The sound blended with the scrape of tools and the low rumble of moving wagons, filling the air with a symphony of construction. Food and water stations were set up at intervals to keep the workers sustained. Fires burned constantly, boiling water for drinking, heating meals, or softening substances like lime. The ground often turned to mud beneath so many feet, but no one paused. The work continued with relentless determination. Rome, after all, did not rise by waiting. As the road's layers began to take shape, the engineers moved among the workers with sharp eyes and calm authority. They checked measurements with their corbets, inspected the placement of stones, and ensured that the foundations were level. These men understood that a single miscalculation could cause a section of road to fail years later. It was their responsibility to ensure that every foot of the surface held the same uncompromising quality. Despite the challenges, there were moments of simple human connection. Soldiers shared jokes between shifts, leaning on their tools while catching their breath. Laborers from distant provinces exchanged stories of their homelands, marveling at how different and yet how similar their lives were. A slave might teach a soldier how to lift stones with fewer injuries, A soldier might teach a local farmer how to cut wood more efficiently. In these interactions, a strange kind of unity emerged, a unity not born of equality, but of shared effort. And still, the work continued. Day after day, week after week, sometimes for months or even years. There were difficulties, of course. Storms swept across construction sites with sudden fury, drenching the earth and turning trenches into rivers of mud. In such times, work halted, and shelter became the only priority. Heat waves baked the stones until they could burn bare skin. Harsh winters slowed progress, freezing the ground and stiffening the hands of even the most seasoned workers. But Rome accounted for such setbacks. The empire's strength lay not in speed, but in persistence. At night, when the workforce finally rested, camps glowed with small fires. Soldiers repaired tools or sharpened blades. Laborers tended to sore muscles or wrap their hands in cloth. Simple meals of bread, lentils, dried meat, and wine restored energy. Above them, the stars shimmered in cold silence, watching as men shaped the world beneath their glow. And then, with the first light of dawn, the process began again. As the road neared completion, a sense of quiet triumph filled the camp. Workers could see the transformation with their own eyes. What had once been wild, uneven land was now a straight, sturdy line stretching toward the horizon. The stones, newly set, glistened faintly in the morning light. The drainage ditches curved neatly alongside the surface. The layers beneath their feet, stamen, rootus, nucleus, held the weight of generations to come. When the final paving stones were laid, the engineers walked the entire length of the road, inspecting every detail. Only when they were satisfied did they declare the work complete. The ceremony often followed, simple but meaningful. Offerings might be made to local spiriters, to gods of the earth, or travel to Fortuna for safety. Then the legionaries lifted their packs, faced the road they had built with their own hands, and marched forward upon it. Some would never return to that place. Others would walk it again years later, marveling at how their labor had endured. But all knew one truth. A Roman road was a legacy. It connected people, lands, and histories. It carried armies, merchants, travelers, and dreams. It stood as a testament not only to Rome's ambition, but to the thousands of hands from the proud, and the free to the weary and the enslaved who built its bones with sweat, skill, and sacrifice. In next part of story, we descend once more beneath the surface to explore how the first foundation layer, the stamen, became the unshakable bedrock of Roman connectivity. Before the strength of Rome could be felt upon the surface of a finished road, before the polished stones gleamed beneath the sun, the empire had to begin with something far humbler. The earth itself. Every enduring creation begins with a foundation, and for the Romans, this truth was universal. Whether erecting temples that scraped the sky or forging the long, unwavering lines of their highways, they believed firmly that the unseen base determined the destiny of the structure above it. And so, the story of a Roman road's legendary endurance begins deep in the ground, with the first layer that anchored everything that followed the stamen. Once the land had been surveyed and the route precisely marked, the transformation began with the careful excavation of a long, deep trench. Soldiers and laborers stood shoulder to shoulder, their tools rising and falling in steady rhythm as soil was lifted away. The sound of metal striking earth echoed across valleys and hillsides, each strike carving away centuries of untouched land, making space for something new and purposeful. Workers removed loose topsoil until they reached firm, compacted ground soil that could bear weight, resist shifting, and endure time's relentless pressure. Only when the earth was deemed stable did the laying of the stamen begin. It started quietly, with the first stone, a large, irregular slab lifted from a nearby quarry, riverbed, or hillside, carried with effort and set gently into the trench. It landed with a muted thud, settling into place like a puzzle piece forming the first edge of a much larger picture. The Romans were deliberate in selecting these stones. They needed to be strong, heavy, and able to distribute weight across their broad surfaces. They were not shaped for beauty, but for purpose. Their irregularities created natural interlocks, allowing them to grip each other with surprising strength. As more stones were placed, The trench began to fill with a mosaic of rough, sturdy blocks. Workers knelt in the dirt, leveling each one by hand, adjusting its position until it sat with unwavering stability. This was slow work, demanding patience and attention. But Rome understood something many civilizations overlooked. Longevity was not a result of speed, but of care. If the Statamen layer was flawed, the entire road above it could buckle, settle, or crack. Thus, each stone became a silent commitment to future generations. Under the midday sun, the labor was relentless. Sweat ran down the faces of legionaries and slaves alike, streaking through dust and dirt. The stones were heavy, often requiring several men to move them with levers and ropes. Fingers bruised, backs strained, and breath came short and sharp. Yet the work never faltered. Commands echoed through the air, punctuated by the rhythmic scraping of stone against earth. Slowly, the trench transformed, taking on the first traces of the road it would become. What makes the Statamen remarkable is not merely its strength, but the philosophy behind it. The Romans understood that the ground shifts with seasons, that rain seeps into soil, that frost expands and contracts beneath the surface. Without a stable foundation, even the most beautiful pavement would eventually succumb to nature's quiet persistence. The Statamen served as a shield, a protective layer separating the road from the unpredictable behavior of the earth below. It bore the weight of armies, carts, animals, and travelers, absorbing the shock of impact so that the layers above could remain unbroken. As the trench filled, workers tested the firmness of the layer by walking across it, feeling for any give underfoot. Engineers inspected the arrangement, sometimes stepping back to view the stones as a whole, as though studying the expression of a face to ensure nothing was out of harmony. They adjusted where needed, adding smaller stones in gaps, wedging fractured pieces into crevices, tightening the structure with the meticulous care of craftsmen. All the while, the landscape around them transformed. Piles of excavated soil lined the edges of the worksite. Quarry carts creaked as they delivered more stone. Water carriers moved among the workers, offering relief from the heat. Fires burned at the periphery, boiling water to mix with lime for the layers that would follow. The air was thick with dust, but also with a sense of momentum. Every stone laid brought the empire one step closer to expanding its reach. When the Statamen layer finally stretched out across the landscape, a continuous line of sturdy stone, it carried a sense of profound achievement. There was nothing elegant about it to the untrained eye. It looked crude, rough, a bed of broken rock. Yet beneath that appearance lay one of the most sophisticated ideas in engineering. Build from strength, build from stability, build from the ground up. At night, as the workers rested and fires flickered across the camp, the newly laid foundation seemed to hum quietly with potential. It was as though the earth itself recognized the significance of what had been placed upon it. This was no ordinary path. It was the beginning of something that would outlast empires, nations, and the very people who built it. In time, travelers would walk across this stretch of ground without ever knowing the effort that lay hidden beneath their feet. They would marvel at the smooth paving above the crisp edges of milestones, the reliable straightness stretching toward distant horizons. Rarely would anyone imagine the sweat-soaked labor, the aching muscles, the careful placement of thousands of stones that formed the layer no I ever celebrated. But this anonymity was the nature of the Statamen. It did not demand praise. It existed to serve, to hold, to support. Its purpose was silent, and yet it was essential. Without it, nothing above could endure. As work progressed, the road began to rise, layer by layer. The Statamen welcomed the rudis above it, forming a partnership of strength and flexibility. When rain fell, the Statamen remained steadfast. When cots rumbled overhead, it absorbed their weight. When frost crept into the earth, it held firm, anchored by the collective effort of countless hands. And through all of this, it never changed its role. It remained the unseen guardian of Roman connectivity. In this quiet foundation, we find a reflection of Rome itself, a civilization built not only on grand gestures and visible triumphs, but on the steady labor of those who shaped the world behind the scenes. The Statamen reminds us that the most enduring achievements often begin with the simplest of acts, placing one stone, then another, then another. As we move into next chapter, we rise from the foundation to explore the next layers, the rudis, and the nucleus, and witness how Rome transformed raw materials into a unified structure capable of carrying the weight of centuries. With the statement firmly in place, the Roman road stood ready for the next stages of its transformation. The rough stones of the foundation, irregular and ancient in appearance, seemed to murmur beneath the sunlight, waiting for the weight and artistry that would soon press upon them. The builders knew that while a strong base was essential, it was only the beginning. To make a road truly resilient, to allow it to carry armies, traders, animals, and the constant thrum of an empire's ambitions, Rome needed something more refined, more intentionally crafted. And so the next layers were introduced. The rudis and the nucleus, the quiet strength and the beating heart of the road. As morning light washed over the worksite, laborers and soldiers gathered once more, their tools already warm from constant use. The trench was no longer a scar across the earth. It had become a promise. The sound of footsteps on the stadamen echoed with a certain firmness, a subtle reminder that the foundation had been built to endure. But endurance alone was not enough. The road needed resilience, flexibility beneath strength, and this is where the rudis played its essential role. The rudis was a mixture born not of elegance, but of practicality and precision. Crushed stones, gravel, lime, and sometimes broken pottery were combined into a coarse, gritty blend that the workers poured in great heaps onto the The material was rough, dusty, and deceptively simple. Yet, within its composition lay a profound understanding of the earth's shifting moods. The rudis acted as a buffer, layer capable of absorbing the shock of wheels, and hooves, expanding and contracting with the seasons, and distributing pressure so evenly that the stones beneath remained undisturbed. Teams of workers moved in rhythm as they spread the rudis by hand and shovel. Their motions were smooth, practiced, honed through countless similar tasks performed across the empire. As they worked, clouds of dust drifted into the air, carrying the scent of lime and stone. Nearby, water carriers filled buckets from barrels and poured just enough liquid onto the mixture to activate the lime, creating a primitive but powerfully effective cement. The wet rudis darkened, thickened, and became almost clay-like in texture. Then came the beating. Roman workers tamped down the rudis using heavy rammers, wooden tools weighted with iron driven repeatedly into the mixture, until it compacted into a dense, unyielding layer. Each strike sent a dull vibration through the ground, as though the earth itself was assisting in the construction. The legionaries moved with a rhythm that seemed almost ceremonial, each blow landing with purpose. Watching them was like witnessing a silent chant, focused, powerful, and deeply rooted in the Roman belief and discipline. Over time, the rudis settled into a solid bed, one that could bear weight without cracking. When a supervisor walked across it, there was no shift, no softness, only the quiet firmness of a layer that understood its duty. The builders respected this part of the road. They knew that though the rudis would never be seen by travelers, it would carry them all the same. Its strength was not in appearance, but in commitment. With the rudis complete, the construction rose once more into refinement. The next layer, the nucleus, awaited its turn. If the rudis was the muscle, the nucleus was the nervifiner. More cohesive blend, designed to bring unity to the layers above and below. The nucleus consisted of smaller gravel, crushed ceramics, fine sand, and lime, mixed until the material formed a smooth but firm aggregate. It was neither coarse nor soft. It occupied the perfect middle ground. Workers poured the nucleus with the same care they had given to the rudis, but their movements shifted subtly. The spreading was more delicate, the leveling more meticulous. The mixture flowed like gritty flour, settling naturally into the crevices of the rudis beneath. Once again, water was added to activate the binding lime, turning the nucleus into a material that would, in time, harden nearly as strong as modern concrete. The tamping resumed, but this time, the sound was softer. Instead of the deep thuds of the rudis, the nucleus produced a muted, steady rhythm, one that felt almost like a heartbeat beneath the road's growing structure. Engineers often watched this stage with particular attention. The nucleus served as the transition layer, smoothing imperfections, evening out inconsistencies, and preparing the surface for the final, visible stones. A flaw here could lead to cracks above, and cracks could compromise the entire road. Thus, the engineers walked back and forth, testing the surface with practiced steps, sensing with their boots what their eyes could not see. As this layer took shape, something shifted in the atmosphere of the worksite. The road was no longer just an idea, or a trench, or a bed of stones. It was becoming an object of intention. Workers could now imagine carts rolling across its surface, soldiers marching in formation, merchants calling out to one another as their goods traveled between distant provinces. They could imagine the way the road would respond, how it would hold steady beneath weight, how it would whisper quietly beneath generations of footsteps. The nucleus, though hidden, was the soul of this future movement. Above all, it provided flexibility without weakness. Rome understood that roads needed not only to endure but to adapt. Earth swells with winter frost and contracts beneath scorching summers. Heavy rains soften the ground. Long droughts harden it. The nucleus absorbed the slow tensions of the natural world, protecting the road from the fractures that plagued lesser civilizations. It shifted gently, almost imperceptibly, allowing the upper paving stones to remain intact and stable. As the workers stepped back and surveyed their progress, a calm satisfaction settled over the camp. The statamen had anchored the road to the earth. The rootus had given it brute resilience. The nucleus had given it refined strength. Together, these layers formed a structure that could bear not just the weight of travelers, but the weight of time. In many ways, these hidden layers reflected the very spirit of Rome. The empire did not rise on a single idea or a single generation. It rose through foundations, through adaptations, through careful layering of discipline, innovation, ambition, and resilience. What lay beneath Rome's laws, its culture, its systems, was what allowed its visible glory to shine so brilliantly. And like the roads, much of that glory began in places no one ever saw. As night-filled workers rested, leaning against unfinished stretches of the road. Fires glowed softly, illuminating the smooth surface of the nucleus. Engineers whispered about the next steps, the shaping of the top stones, the crowning of the road, the final touches that would turn this layered structure into a pathway worthy of the empire. The stars shimmered overhead, unaware that below them, humans were crafting something that would outlast even many of the constellations by name. In Chapter 7, we rise to the final layer, the summum. Dorsum, witness how Rome transformed practical engineering into a paved surface that still echoes with history. Under modern skies, with the nucleus settled firmly into place, the Roman road stood ready for its crowning achievement, the layer that every traveler would see, feel, and remember. This was the summum dorsum, the paved surface, the gleaming armor of the empire's arteries. If the layers beneath were the muscles and sinews of the road, this was its face, the unmistakable expression of Roman engineering, confidence, and order. To walk on a completed Roman road was to experience a mastery of craft so refined that even after 2 millennia, fragments of these surfaces still whisper the story of their creation. The process began at dawn, as many Roman labors did. The air was cool, the light soft, and the stones stacked in careful piles cast long shadows across the landscape. These stones, carefully chosen from local quarries, were cut into polygonal shapes or rectangular slabs. Some were small and tightly packed. Others were broad and heavy, carved with such precision that their edges met like pieces of a grand puzzle. The choice of stone depended on the region. Basalt in volcanic lands, limestone in the Mediterranean heartlands, sandstone in Britain, and marble in select ceremonial areas. Yet, no matter the material, the character of the road remained distinctly Roman. Before the first stone was laid, engineers walked the length of the road, gauging its alignment with the horizon. The Roman love of straightness was not merely aesthetic. It symbolized purpose and clarity. Whenever possible, the summum dorsum continued this principle, stretching toward the distance with unwavering resolve. Only mountains, rivers, or deep ravines forced Rome's hand to curve, and even then, the deviation was deliberate and balanced. Once the route was confirmed, the craftsman stepped forward. Unlike the brute strength required for the statamon or the broad labor of the rudis, this stage demanded a different kind of skill, one rooted in shaping, fitting, and listening to the stone itself. Stonemasons knelt beside their materials, tapping gently with hammers and chisels, shaping angles and smoothing edges. The sound of metal against stone rang repeatedly through the air, sometimes sharp and bright, sometimes low and echoing, creating a kind of workshop symphony under the open sky. When the first stone was ready, workers carried it carefully to the road, lowering it onto the nucleus. The placement was ritualistic, almost ceremonial. The engineer oversaw the alignment, checking that it matched the broader pattern. The stone needed to sit firmly, without wobble, and at just the right height, high enough to shed water, low enough to join the other stones seamlessly. Each stone was laid slightly higher in the center and lower at the sides, giving the entire road a gentle, rounded crown. This curvature allowed rain to slide naturally toward the drainage ditches, ensuring that water never pooled or weakened the structure. As more stones were placed, the surface began to take on the smooth, rhythmic pattern that travelers would come to admire. From a distance, the road shimmered faintly, as though the sun itself recognized the craftsmanship. Up close, each joint seemed to speak a language of precision. No gaps too wide. No surfaciunaben, every seam fitted with a stonemason's pride. Workers pressed sand into the small crevices, filling the spaces and locking the stones even more tightly together. The process continued for hours, then days, then weeks. The work was taxing, especially for those who lifted the heavy stones again and again. Backs strained, shoulders tightened, and hands grew calloused and bruised. Yet there was a rhythm to the labor, a quiet harmony that came from many hands working toward a single purpose. Soldiers helped position stones, slaves hauled materials. Skilled craftsmen shaped and aligned. By the glow of midday sun or the gentler light of early evening, the surface expanded steadily, transforming the once raw path into a striking ribbon of organized strength. As the road grew, so too did its story. Workers often paused during breaks to study the newly laid surface, imagining how it would feel beneath their own feet once complete. They spoke of the travelers who would one day cross it, messengers racing with urgent news, merchants leading caravans laden with goods, families journeying to new lives within the empire. Is a vast embrace. They imagined legions marching, the sound of thousands of sandals striking the stones in unison, a thunderous heartbeat of power that only a road like this could support. The craftsmen knew that every stone mattered, for a poorly placed slab could jolt a cart, trip a horse, or loosen under the pounding rhythm of iron-shod hooves, and so they worked with precision born of both pride and necessity. Rome demandet, exissent, not through cruelty, but through expectation. Every worker understood that this road was not simply for the present, it was for centuries yet to unfold. By the time the summum dorsum extended in long, completed stretches, the road had begun to resemble a river of stone flowing across the land. Standing upon it, one could feel its solidity and almost living firmness beneath the soles. The stones retained warmth during the day, releasing it slowly at night, creating a faint, comforting radiance long after the sun dipped below the horizon. Visitors from neighboring tribes or distant provinces often watched the construction with awe. To them, such roads were marvels far superior to dirt tracks or uneven paths common in many regions. They noted the diligence, the geometry, the strange but captivating idea that a road could be intentionally crafted to remain intact through storms and years. Some wrote about the roads in letters. Others told stories around fires, describing them as paths made of thunder or rivers that never change. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about the summum dorsum was not its beauty or its endurance. It was its sense of invitation. Rome understood that a good road did not merely connect places, it connected people. When the surface was complete, it did not feel like a barrier placed upon the landscape. Instead, it felt like a guide, drawing travelers forward, promising certainty in an uncertain world. And through all of this, it became clear that the summum dorsum was not only the final layer, it was the legacy layer. The road's face, shaped by many hands, carried the identity of Rome wherever it stretched. It was a symbol, a message carved into the earth. Rome values order. Rome values connection. Rome values the future. Even centuries later, as vegetation crept around the edges of abandoned stretches, as empires fell and new kingdoms rose, many of these stones remained in place, their edges weathered, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of footsteps, but still they held. Travelers in medieval times often mistook them for the work of giants or ancient gods, marveling at their persistence. Even today, tourists can walk these same stones, feeling the ancient texture beneath their feet, sensing the echo of legions long gone. And beneath those stones, the Rudis and Nucleus still rest, performing their quiet work, supporting the weight of history. In Chapter 8, the story rises beyond the stones themselves, for the Roman road was not only a structure, it was part of a larger world of travel. Inns, rest stops, milestones, horse exchanges, and entire networks of infrastructure emerged, turning the road from a simple path into a living system. A Roman road, on its own, was a marvel layered, strong, enduring. But the true genius of Rome lay not only in what they built beneath travelers' feet, but in the world they built around those stones. A road without support is simply a path. A road with infrastructure becomes a network, a living artery that pulses with life, commerce, culture, and movement. From the moment the first stones were set, Rome understood that a highway was not merely a route between two distant places, but a system designed to sustain the flow of humanity across an empire too vast to comprehend in a single breath. When a traveler stepped onto a Roman road, they entered a carefully curated experience, one crafted long before modern planners ever imagined highway systems, rest stops, or organized postal routes. Rome crafted all of these to millennia early. Now imagine yourself upon such a road. The summum dorsum gleams softly beneath the rising sun. Ahead, the road stretches into the horizon, straight and certain. But before you take your first steps, you spot something familiar and reassuring, the first of many milestones. Tall stone markers set at regular intervals, carved with Latin inscriptions. Each milestone told you exactly where you were, how far you'd come, and how far remained to your destination. They recorded the name of the emperor under whose rule the road was built or restored, offering a subtle reminder of Rome. These stones were more than markers. They were monuments of order in a world that often drifted toward chaos. As you continued your journey, you soon realized that the road was not empty. At predictable intervals, between 20 and 30 kilometers apart, you'd find a mansio, a Roman rest house. These established stops were essential for official travelers, government messengers, soldiers on assignment, or couriers carrying vital information from one end of the empire to the other. But over time they became havens for merchants, scholars, and weary travelers seeking rest. The mansio offered shelter, food, warmth, and safety. Guests could find stables for their animals, fresh water, a place to repair broken gear, and even modest sleeping quarters. By night, the flickering light of oil lamps cast a welcoming glow, inviting travelers to share stories, exchange news, or simply rest from the road's long demands. It was in these mansionese that friendships formed between strangers, where new alliances were whispered into existence, where rumors and news traveled just as swiftly as the imperial dispatches. But not all stops required such extensive shelters. Between the major stations lay the mutatio, smaller relay points dedicated to one essential purpose: changing horses. These were vital to the cursus publicus, the imperial postal service. Couriers could arrive at a mutatio, hand over exhausted horses, and mount fresh ones within minutes. This simple innovation allowed messages to travel astonishing distances in remarkably short times. Orders sent from Rome could reach distant provinces in days rather than weeks. The empire moved quickly because its communication moved quickly, and its roads were the veins carrying that information with relentless efficiency. Picture a courier racing down the road, cloak billowing, hooves pounding against the stone. Dust swirls in his wake as he steers his mount toward a distant muteo. Soldiers stationed there hear him long before they see him. As they arribes, they lead the tired horse away and bring forth a fresh one, trained and ready. Without dismounting fully, the courier transfers himself to the new animal, thanks the soldiers with a curt nod, and is off again in less than a minute. His speed made possible by a system as organized as the road itself. The roads also supported trade in a way no civilization had managed before. Merchants walked or rode in steady streams across them, transporting olive oil from Spain, wine from Italy, marble from Greece, grain from Egypt, silk from the East, and goods from countless corners of the empire. Caravans laden with amphorae creaked along the stones, their wheels groaning under the weight of supplies. Traders sang songs to break the monotony, their voices blending with the clatter of hooves and the calls of animals. Along the way, they might encounter small market stalls near settlements, set up specifically because the road brought customers. Towns flourished simply because a road passed near them. Villages became trade centers, remote outposts, transformed into lively hubs of culture and commerce. And where commerce thrived, culture followed. Roman roads were more than channels for trade, they were conduits for ideas. A travilla, walk in the via Appia, might hear Greek philosophy discussed at a mansio, learn a Celtic legend from a merchant, and observe Roman law being enacted in a provincial town hall in the course of a single day's journey. Languages mingled, religions spread, fashion changed, and customs moved from region to region with quiet ease. The roads carried the empire's intellectual breath just as surely as they carried its soldiers and merchants. For soldiers, these roads were lifelines. Legions stationed at distant frontiers depended on them for supplies, reinforcements, and communication. A commander could request additional troops and expect them to arrive with precision because the roads allowed it. Soldiers marched in perfect rhythm, their sandals striking the stones with the confident certainty that the road beneath them would not crumble or shift. To march on a Roman road was to feel Rome itself supporting your steps. In moments of crisis, the roads became the empire's shield. Rebellions in distant provinces were quelled quickly because troops could arrive swiftly. Natural disasters were answered with supplies transported efficiently across the network. Even political transitions, sometimes chaotic and uncertain, relied on these roads to stabilize the empire. A new emperor's name would spread across provinces with remarkable speed, carried on dispatches that sped along the very routes we explore now. Travelers also found comfort in the consistency of these roads, no matter where one went. From Battania, as misty edges to the sun-baked deserts of Syria, the roads carried the same familiar feel. The same structure, the same stones, the same gentle curvature guiding rain away. It was a unifying architecture, a quiet reminder that wherever you walked, Rome was present. Even the landscape itself was shaped by the roads. Farmers built fields along their edges, inns sprang up to serve travelers, and shrines appeared to honor local gods who watched over the pathways. The roads stitched the empire together physically, but also socially and spiritually. And so, a Roman road was never just a road. It was a network of human movement, safety, rest, economy, governance, and culture. It was a grand system in which each piece supported the next, a chain of infrastructure that elevated simple travel into a sophisticated experience unmatched by ancient civilizations. As travelers reached their destinations, they rarely thought about the layers of planning and construction that made their journeys possible. They may have noticed the smooth stones or the welcoming mansio, but rarely did they imagine the countless hands, minds, and systems that worked together to sustain the road's promise. Yet that is the true legacy of Roman engineering. It functioned so naturally, so seamlessly, that one almost forgot it was engineered at all. Long before books were common, before news traveled on paper or ink, before borders were drawn with any precision, the world learned its stories through movement, through the footsteps of travelers, the rumble of wagons, the march of soldiers, and the voices of strangers meeting in distant lands. And nowhere was this movement more concentrated, more deliberate, and more transformative than on the roads of Rome. These stone pathways, laid with discipline and ingenuity, did far more than link cities. They carried the empire's culture, identity, and influence across landscapes that had once been strangers to one another. To walk a Roman road was to walk through an invisible current of ideas. People moved along these paths not only with goods and messages, but with languages, beliefs, customs, and memories. The road became the stage on which Rome shared itself with the world and absorbed the world in return. Imagine two travelers meeting upon the Via Appia. One is a merchant from Alexandria, his cloak light and flowing, the scent of spices clinging to his cargo. The other is a craftsman from Gaul, carrying tools wrapped in cloth and stories carried in his accent. As they step aside to let a courier pass, their conversation begins with trade, but soon wanders to language. Whether stories of home, and rumors carried from distant provinces. Neither man belongs to the same world, not entirely, but on this road, beneath this Roman sky, they share common ground. Such exchanges happened countless times, turning the empire into a cultural tapestry woven with threads pulled from every direction. The roads encouraged this, mingling by offering safety and predictability. Travelers knew what to expect. Milestones marking progress, rest houses offering refuge, and soldiers patrolling the paths to deter bandits. With safety came confidence, and with confidence came movement, and with movement came transformation. Roman roads carried the Latin language into places where it had never been spoken. Legionaries posted along the frontier shared Latin commands. Merchants conducted business using it, and local inhabitants began adopting it in markets and settlements that sprang up beside the roads. Over generations, Latin blended with local dialects, eventually evolving into new languages. Altogether Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. These languages, born from the rhythms of spoken Latin, remain some of the clearest echoes of Roman roads in the modern world. But language was only one layer of the cultural journey. Roman law traveled along these pathways as well. Governors, magistrates, and administrators used the roads to reach distant towns, bringing with them a system of rules that emphasized contracts, rights, arbitration, and civic responsibility. Local populations observed new ways of resolving disputes, organizing commerce, and governing their communities. In time, many adopted Roman practices, not because they were forced to, but because the system brought order and predictability to qualities highly valued in ancient life. Architecture, too, followed the roads. Roman-style forums, bathhouses, amphitheaters, and temples appeared in places that had once known only humble wooden structures. Alongside the road, travelers might pass a public bath, where people from different regions gathered to wash, relax, and converse. They might encounter aqueducts, rising over valleys, bridges spanning rivers, and gates marking city entrances, each constructed with the same unmistakable aesthetic, symmetry, proportion, and permanence. Even religion traveled the roads. Roman gods made their way into distant lands, while foreign deities traveled in the opposite direction, eventually earning places within Rome's own spiritual landscape. A soldier returning from Syria might bring tales of Eastern gods. A merchant from Egypt might introduce new rituals or charms to curious listeners. Over time, these small exchanges reshaped Rome's spiritual identity, creating a diverse and vibrant religious mosaic. And the roads did not simply carry culture outward, they carried it inward as well. Cities like Rome, Carthage, Antioch, and Constantinople became melting pots filled with accents from faraway lands, exotic foods, fabrics, and philosophies. The aroma of African incense blended with the smell of Italian olive oil. Scholars debated Greek philosophy in Roman forums. Traders brought carpets from Persia, glass from Syria, and gems from the Caucasus. Even the emperor felt the tug of distant influences, hearing news of uprisings, miracles, discoveries, and innovations carried swiftly by the roads to his doorstep. But culture is not only about objects or ideas. It is also about people, their hopes, fears, ambitions, and stories. The roads enabled people to travel for reasons far beyond trade or duty. A young scholar might walk miles to study under a renowned teacher in a distant city. A family might journey to find a better life in a new province. Lovers separated by distance might write letters that couriers carried through mencios and mutations, their words moving as quickly as a horse could gallop. Pilgrims traveled to sacred sites. Soldiers moved to new postings. Actors brought plays to towns that had never seen theater. And artisans refined their crafts by learning from others they met along the way. Every journey left an imprint. A potter from España might return home with a new design learned in Rome. A chef in Gaul might adopt a spice brought from the East. A child in North Africa might grow up learning the stories of Hercules alongside those of local heroes. The road spread culture, not through force, but through exposure, exchange, and the simple joy of discovery. Yet these roads did not erase local traditions, they blended them. Rome rarely demanded uniformity. Instead, it encouraged a common framework within which different cultures could flourish. The result was a world neither entirely Roman nor entirely local, but something rich, layered, and interconnected. A world where a Roman citizen in Syria felt equal under the law to one in Gaul, where a trader from Britain could find familiar milestones in Italy, where a traveler could recognize Roman craftsmanship thousands of miles from the capital. In many ways, the roads created a shared identity, one that transcended geography. It was not simply the identity of a conqueror and the conquered, but of participants in a vast, intricate system that valued movement, communication, and adaptation. Even after the empire fractured and fell, the cultural networks established by these roads continued. Medieval kingdoms inherited the old pathways, preserving them unconsciously as trade routes, pilgrimage trails, and borders. The languages shaped by Latin endured. Legal systems adapted Roman principles. Architectural styles carried ancient influence. The echoes of culture spread by Roman roads continued to resonate long after their creators vanished. Today, walking a surviving stretch of Roman road, one can almost feel the invisible currents of culture that once flowed along it. The stones beneath your feet have heard countless stories, absorbed countless languages, and carried countless dreams. They are, in essence, guardians of memory sila, enduring and deeply human. For all their brilliance, Roman roads were not immortal by accident. Stone alone does not survive centuries of storms, nor do foundations endure without attention. What allowed Roman roads to remain usable for generations was not only their engineering, but the vast system of care, vigilance, and discipline that surrounded them. Where many civilizations built impressive structures only to abandon them to the mercy of time, Rome nurtured its roads like living beings, standing to them, repairing them, and guarding them as fiercely as any fortress. The road was a promise, and Rome never made promises lightly. From the moment a road opened, responsibility fell upon a carefully coordinated network of officials, soldiers, local communities, and specialists known as curators virum, the guardians of the roads. These men were the empire's inspectors, its custodians of mobility. They traveled the routes regularly, sometimes on horseback, sometimes in covered wagons, watching for cracks in the stone, erosion along the ditches, damaged milestones, or weakening bridges. Their eyes were trained to notice the smallest flaws on Unaben, slab-clogged drainage channel, even the faintest depression where the ground had shifted. To the untrained traveler, such imperfections seemed trivial. To the curator, they were warnings of future collapse. He knew that water seeping into a crack could widen it through frost, that a single sinking stone could loosen its neighbors, that a poorly maintained ditch could flood an entire section of road in a violent storm. And so repairs were not delayed. Rome's philosophy was simple and wise. Fix problems while they are small, and they will never grow large enough to threaten the whole. Maintenance was often carried out by local communities, whose own prosperity depended on the road's condition. Town councils appointed workers to clear debris, cut back vegetation, and sweep the stones of accumulated dirt. Wealthy merchants sometimes financed repairs along sections that benefited their trade routes, donating funds to keep the road smooth for wagons carrying goods. Even private citizens occasionally contributed, knowing that a well-kept road made travel safer for their families and their futures. But the most reliable caretakers were the Roman soldiers. Garrisoned along strategic points, they patrolled the roads with vigilance, not only guarding travelers from bandits, but ensuring the road itself remained intact. Their presence gave life to the empire's arteries. At dawn, a pair of soldiers might march along a stretch of road, their armor glinting, scanning the stones beneath their feet for signs of wear. At midday, another patrol would appear, asking travelers about hazards or obstructions they had encountered. By evening, the soldiers recorded these observations, preparing orders for repair crews who would work the next day. Banditry, too, compelled constant vigilance. In remote areas, dense forests, rugged mountain paths, or desolate plain steeps, sometimes targeted travelers or caravans. Rome knew that safety was essential to movement, and movement was essential to unity. Thus, soldiers patrolled even the most isolated stretches, stationing themselves at watchtowers or small forts positioned along the road. Their vigilance discouraged crime, allowing merchants, families, and officials to travel with confidence. A safe road was a used road, and a used road was a road worth maintaining. Bridges, which formed some of the most impressive features along Roman routes, required even greater attention, spanning rivers both gentle and fierce. These structures relied on arches and precisely set masonry. Floods, however, could undermine their foundations. Special crews known as equerri inspected waterways and bridge bases, watching for signs of erosion or shifting stones. When damage appeared, repairs were swift. Stones replaced, supports reinforced, channels redirected. Rome refused to allow nature to undo what human skill had accomplished. Drainage systems, perhaps the most crucial element of maintenance, also required constant supervision. Rome's engineers had learned that water was the eternal enemy of roads. Thus, along every route, ditches lined the sides, carved with gentle slopes to usher rainwater away. Culverts ran beneath the road, stone tunnels allowing streams to pass without weakening the layers above. These systems worked only if kept clear, and so workers regularly removed silt, mud, leaves, and stones that accumulated over time. After storms, large teams were dispatched to inspect the channels, ensuring the water still flowed freely. Sometimes the repairs were as small as stone reset, a ditch cleared, a milestone straightened. Other times, they were immense. Earthquakes could crack entire sections of road. Landslides could bury them beneath tons of soil and rock. Floods could wash away bridges or collapse embankments. In such moments, the empire mobilized like an army, preparing for battle. Engineers traveled to the site, studied the damage, and designed solutions. Workers gathered in hundreds, bringing timber, stone, lime, and tools. Bit by bit, they rebuilt what had fallen, often improving upon the original design. Travelers passing such sites might pause, watching as Rome healed its wounded road. They saw soldiers directing laborers, heard the clang of hammers and chisels, felt the ground tremble from falling stones, and realized that these roads were living monuments capable of being harmed, but always restored, always renewed. Even the milestones' simple markers by the roadside received careful attention. If one fell, it was righted. If one dead, it was replaced. These stones were symbols of Rome's order, offering reassurance to every traveler who ventured into unfamiliar lands. To see a milestone standing tall was to feel the empire's invisible hand guiding your journey. At times, inspectors discovered sections of road that had grown uneven after years of use. In such cases, a team of workers removed the top stones, reset the nucleus beneath, and relayed the paving slabs with fresh precision. It was laborious work, but it extended the road's lifespan by decades. Rome rarely abandoned a road. It transformed it again and again, preserving its purpose through the centuries. But maintenance was not purely physical, it was also administrative. Provincial governors were responsible for ensuring that the roads within their territories remained functional. They filed reports, distributed funds, and coordinated with local councils. The system was bureaucratic, yes, but also deeply practical. Roads were the veins of the empire. If they failed, communication faltered, trade slowed, and military response weakened. Rome understood this deeply, and so did every official entrusted with their care. As twilight fell upon a well-maintained road, one could feel the quiet assurance it offered. The stones, worn smooth by countless travelers, still lay firm and even. The ditches still guided water in gentle arcs away from the surface. The watchtowers still cast long shadows across the land, reminders of the soldiers who stood ready to protect both travelers and the road. Beneath their feet, it was a system held together not just by engineering, but by human dedication, a collaboration between authority and effort, discipline and duty. And long after the empire waned, the roads remained. Though many fell into disrepair, their foundations endured, waiting for new civilizations to discover their strength and restore them once more. Medieval kings expanded them. Renaissance travelers marveled at them. Modern archaeologists study them. The world continues to use what Rome once built, sometimes without even realizing it. There are places in the world where time seems to hesitate, places where the past is not gone but merely resting, waiting for travelers to notice the faint heartbeat beneath the soil. Roman roads belong to such places. Though empires have risen and fallen, Though kingdoms have shifted their borders, though centuries have reshaped landscapes and lives, the Roman roads remain like quiet, resilient witnesses. Some lie exposed under open sky. Others sleep beneath modern asphalt. A few wind silently through forests where no legions march anymore. Yet everywhere they exist, they whisper the same thing. We are still here. Walk upon one of these surviving roads, and you will feel it. Immediately that subtle sensation of stepping into the footsteps of people long gone. The stones, worn smooth by generations of travelers, hold the imprint of history in their gentle dips and rises. Sunlight glints across surfaces shaped both by craft and by time. Grass creeps softly against the edges, and wildflowers bloom beside stones once polished by chariot wheels. It feels as though the road itself breathes, carrying echoes of all who passed before. Perhaps the most famous of these survivors is Via Appia, the queen of roads. Stretching from Rome toward the distant city of Brindisi, this ancient highway still retains long segments of its original structure. Travelers who walk it today move along the same stones that bore the weight of Julius Caesar's sandals, the rumbling wheels of merchant wagons, and the solemn footsteps of legionaries returning from campaign. On quiet mornings, when fog hangs low and the world falls silent, the Via Appia feels frozen between the eras. Ancient tombs rise along its sides like guardians, their stones cracked but dignified, watching over a road that refuses to fade. In the countryside of France, fragments of Roman roads emerge unexpectedly between vineyards and rolling hills. Local farmers tell stories of plows striking hard stone beneath the soil, revealing lines so straight they seem unnatural. Archaeologists brushing away earth with careful hands, uncovering the familiar layers, Ruda's nucleus still perfectly recognizable after 2 millennia. Sometimes whole sections emerge preserved by accident, spared because they lay beneath farmland untouched by modern machinery. These rediscovered paths, once used by Roman soldiers and Gallic traders, now rest beneath open skies, reminding onlookers that civilization's heartbeat once passed directly through these quiet fields. In Britain, the Roman roads cut across the landscape with such deliberate clarity that modern highways often follow their routes. Sections of Watling Street, Ermina Street, and Fossway still align with today's roads, so precisely that motorists trace Roman footsteps unknowingly. In forested areas, the ancient roads appear as raised ridges, covered now in moss and fallen leaves. Hikers sometimes remark that the path feels too straight, too purposeful. They're correct. Even in silence, even in ruin, the Roman design remains unmistakable. In the deserts of North Africa, portions of Roman roads lie exposed like bleached bones beneath the sunlight. Sand gathers in the joints of the stones, wind shapes the edges, and yet the underlying structure persists. Travelers on foot or camel notice the familiar faint hum beneath their stride, the sense of something engineered rather than shaped by nature. Some roads are surrounded by the remnants of ancient forts, their crumbling walls looking out across empty plains. One can almost imagine the Roman patrols that once kept watch here, scanning horizons that have not changed in thousands of years. And then there are the roads buried beneath cities' hidden layers of history, supporting the weight of modern life. In places like Barcelona, Cologne, and Istanbul, construction crews occasionally dig into the earth, only to discover the unmistakable stones of a Roman road lying quietly beneath the pavement. These forgotten arteries once connected marketplaces, barracks, and temples. Now they lie beneath concrete, yet their presence remains an enduring foundation, both physical and cultural, for the cities above. What fascinates archaeologists most is not merely that these roads survive, but how they do. When they excavate a section, brushing away soil to reveal the familiar cross-section of layers, they encounter a work of engineering so meticulous that nature has struggled for centuries to undo it. The stratum and stones still lie firm beneath the earth. The rudis still shows traces of lime-bound gravel. The nucleus, though hardened with age, still holds its smooth, compacted texture. Even the summum dorsum, where stones have loosened or shifted, retains its original shape, its intended curvature still guiding rainwater away. Each discovery tells a story not just of construction, but of the lives lived upon these stones. Archaeologists find grooves etched by wagon wheels, worn patterns where countless boots once tread, Sometimes they find coins, dropped long ago and buried by dust, pieces of pottery fallen from careless hands, or the remnants of shoes whose owners walked these roads before the world changed beyond recognition. These artifacts, fragile yet enduring, remind us that the roads were not empty. They were the stages upon which millions of personal histories unfolded. And yet, the most profound revelation is not what remains on the roads, but what remains because of them. Villages grew where the roads once passed. Cities rose near crossroads, eventually expanding into centers of culture, trade, and innovation. Medieval kingdoms used the ancient paths as trade routes. Pilgrims followed them on their journeys to holy sites. Merchants used them to transport goods. Even as names changed and empires collapsed, the roads continued to guide human movement. Modern Europe's geography still reflects their presence, with countless highways and local paths echoing the lines first drawn by Roman surveyors. When standing on a surviving Roman road, one cannot help but feel humbled. These stones have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the spread of religions, the birth of languages, the migrations of people, and the turning of countless seasons. They have felt the weight of triumphs and defeats, the footsteps of soldiers and children, the wheels of chariots and carts. They have endured not because time spared them, but because Rome prepared them to endure. In the quiet moments when a breeze stirs across the stones, when a bird calls from a nearby tree, when the road stretches empty into the distance, it becomes easy to imagine hearing faint echoes, a whisper of marching feet, the jingle of harnesses, the sigh of ancient travelers resting beneath the same sun. These echoes are not ghosts. They are memories imprinted into the stones, carried forward by endurance. Roman roads were more than infrastructure. They were lifelines. They were storytellers. They were bridges between eras. And as we approach the end of this journey, one final truth becomes clear. The greatest legacy of Roman roads lies not only in their construction or their endurance, but in the lessons they offer to the modern world. When the last stone was placed on a Roman road, when the final milestone was set upright and the engineers stepped back to admire the work there, hands and minds had shaped, they could not have known the true magnitude of what they had created. They built for their time, for their empire, for the needs of legions and merchants and messengers. Yet their roads would outlive the empire itself, stretching far beyond the lifespans of emperors and dynasties. The roads became not just pathways of an ancient civilization, but the blueprints of the world that would follow. As centuries passed, the legions marched no more. The mansionese and mutations fell silent. Moss crept across stones that had once echoed with chariot wheels. Grass pushed through cracks, reclaiming the edges of the pavements. Cities rose and crumbled. Kingdoms battled over land the Romans once governed. But even as the world changed shape, as languages evolved and cultures transformed, the Roman roads refused to vanish. They endured with a resilience that surprised those who discovered them centuries later. Their legacy begins with something simple and yet profound. The idea that human movement, when organized and supported, can transform the world. Before Rome, travel was a challenge, slow, uncertain, dangerous. Distances felt far not because of geography, but because of the lack of dependable routes. Rome changed this forever. Their roads shrank the world, turning weeks into days, miles into manageable journeys. They demonstrated that structured infrastructure does more than serve people, it empowers civilizations to reach beyond what once seemed possible. Modern societies have inherited this belief. Highways, railroads, air routes, and digital networks all echo the Roman philosophy that connection breeds strength, stability, and opportunity. Every time a road links to distant towns, every time a highway allows a nation to transport goods swiftly, every time a city plans its layout around efficient movement, it reflects the wisdom of those ancient engineers who studied land, laid foundations, and crowned their work with stone. Even the structure of modern roads owes something to Rome. The layering techniques, foundations, gravel beds, drainage systems remain strikingly similar. Engineers still value elevation for runoff, still build multi-layered structures to distribute weight, still design straight routes, whenever possible, to improve travel time. The Romans did not merely build roads, they set the standards for how roads should be built. Yet the legacy is not solely technical. It is cultural and philosophical. Roman roads remind us of the power of unity. Through their vast network, Rome brought together millions of people diverse in language, origin, and tradition and allowed them to coexist within a shared system. The roads enabled trade between strangers, dialogue between cultures, and mutual dependence between distant regions. They showed that when humans communicate, travel, and exchange freely, the world becomes richer, more complex, and more harmonious. Today, our globalized world operates on the same principle. Borders may still divide, but roads along with airplanes, ships, and digital connectivity bind us in a way that echoes Rome's original vision. We speak to people on the other side of continents. We ship goods across oceans in days. We learn traditions born thousands of miles away. All of this stems from the same impulse that drove Rome to pave its empire. The desire to connect. The roads also teach resilience. Rome faced storms, floods, earthquakes, rebellions, political upheavals, and the collapse of central authority. Yet many of their roads continued to function, supporting whatever civilization inherited them. Medieval traders used them to transport goods. Pilgrims walked them on sacred journeys. Armies from new rulers marched along their paved surfaces. Even today, major highways follow the exact route Rome once carved with groma and corobits. This endurance is more than physical. It reflects a mindset of determination to build not for now, but for forever. Modern architects, planners, and engineers still study Roman roads, not only to learn ancient skills, but to understand what it means to create something meant to last beyond one's lifetime. In a world that often races toward quick solutions, the Roman road stands as a reminder of the beauty of long-term vision. Another profound legacy is how the roads preserved stories. Those stones cannot speak. They hold memories in their worn surfaces. They whisper histories that were never written, stories of the weary soldier returning home, the merchant hurrying to market, the family fleeing danger, the pilgrim praying with each step. They remind us that history is not only found in chronicles and manuscripts, but beneath our feet, carried by the very paths people once walked. And then there is identity. Roman roads helped shape the modern map. Cities that grew along ancient routes still thrive today. London, Paris, Cologne, Barcelona, and countless others owe their locations or growth to the arteries carved out by Roman engineers. The roads dictated where people settled, where markets formed, where armies traveled, and where towns flourished. Remove the Roman road network from history, and Europe as we know it would be unrecognizable. Even language bears the imprint of these roads. Words like via, street, route, and mileage trace linguistic paths back to the empire. Phrases that reference roads. All roads lead to Rome. Paving the way, going the extra mile, hold symbolic power because the roads themselves held real power. To walk a Roman road in ancient times was to feel the presence of the empire. Today, the metaphor remains, reminding us of paths that lead toward connection, purpose, and destiny. In many wells, the story of Roman roads is a story of human aspiration. It is a testament to what people can achieve when they combine knowledge, organization, cooperation, and vision. It is a reminder that the greatest monuments are not always towers or statues. Sometimes they are simple, steadfast lines drawn across the earth with intention and care. As we stand at the final chapter of this journey, imagining the road stretching before us, one truth becomes clear. Roman roads are more than relics. They are symbols of continuity. Symbols of how the past shapes the present. Symbols of how human effort, when guided by wisdom, can create something that defies the erosion of centuries. Even today, as cars glide over modern highways and planes cross skies in minutes, the Roman idea of connection remains the foundation of our movement. The technology has changed, but the principle is unchanged. Roads, whether of stone or steel or invisible digital signals, carry us toward one another. They expand our world. They make it possible for civilizations to grow, evolve, and dream. And so, the legacy of Roman roads lives not only in the stones that still lie beneath our feet, but in the way we think about progress, the way we travel, the way we connect. Their endurance is not merely physical, it is philosophical. The Romans built them for an empire. Time preserved them for humanity. And so, dear friends, our journey along the ancient Roman roads comes to a gentle close. Together, we walked the foundations carved by countless hands. We followed the pathways that carried armies, merchants, families, and ideas. And we watched how those stones stood firm against centuries of change. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me tonight. Your presence, your trust, your listening means more than I can express. To my wonderful subscribers, your support keeps this peaceful storytelling alive. And to new listeners discovering this channel for the first time, I'm grateful you chose to spend your evening here. If you enjoyed this soft, immersive journey through history, I invite you to subscribe, not for algorithms, but simply to have a place you can return to whenever life feels heavy, and you want a calm voice to guide you gently into sleep. As this story fades, the relaxing music will continue. Soft, soothing, slow. Let it carry your thoughts into the quiet spaces of your mind. Let your breath deepen, let your shoulders loosen, and allow the peaceful rhythm to cradle you like a warm blanket. Wherever you are in the world tonight, I wish you rest. May your dreams be gentle. May your night be calm. And may the road ahead like Rome's ancient path stay steady beneath your feet. Good night, and thank you for listening.